Why did they always laugh when she walked by? It wasn't cruel, not out loud, but sharp enough to sting. They called her a wrench turner, just another pair of coveralls in a line of mechanics who kept their heads down and their mouths shut. She never answered, never gave them the satisfaction. To them, Claire Hargrove was invisible, and maybe that was the point. But when the F-16 lurched off the runway that afternoon, and the young pilot froze in place, Command made a decision that would rip her invisibility wide open. One ladder, one seat, 1 second that would bring back the past she had buried for 9 long years. The desert heat pressed against the flight line. White light, unforgiving, hammered the concrete until it seemed to shimmer like liquid glass. A taxi horn blared somewhere distant. Rubber hissed against sun-baked runway as an F-16D rolled forward. Claire tightened the pull tabs on her boots without looking up. She had trained herself not to look up, to keep her ears sharper than her eyes. The faint, steady hum of the FLCS test tone carried across the air like a secret only she knew how to listen for. The smell of jet fuel, flux, and hot plastic clung to her coveralls. Inside avionics, she soldered traces, swapped out modules, signed work cards with no flourish. No one lingered at her bench. Questions died after 2 words. Answers never wandered past the surface. It was how she survived. Silence was survival. 9 years had passed since her name was erased, since an OSI badge dictated she would vanish. 2 teammates taken in 6 weeks, an identity leak that gutted her squadron. Orders came fast: erase, rename, relocate. New Mexico was far enough, or so she was told. Now she carried her life in laminated checklists. One, always in her chest pocket. The edges scorched, corners softened by old sweat. She never opened it in front of others. Never explained why her thumb rubbed the plastic like a prayer bead. On the ramp, Evan Cole pulled his F-16D toward the hold line. Canopy closed, visor mirrored, nerves too young for the jet beneath him. The ramp shimmered, crosswinds twisting the air into invisible knives. Engines throbbed against the heat. Cole tapped his canopy twice, a ritual to no one but himself. Claire stood at taxiway A3, sun at her back, earplugs pressed deep. She looked motionless, but every hair on her arm was alive, listening, watching without moving. Colonel Mariah Denton's boots clicked sharp across the pavement. She was polished steel, all command, all eyes. And she didn't miss the jet's wobble. She didn't miss Claire either, standing still, fixed, locked in on something others couldn't see. Denton pointed. "You, rear seat. Keep him alive while I get OSI on the net." No hesitation, no debate. A finger, a ladder, a decision. Claire stripped one glove and climbed, rungs 2 at a time. She slid into the rear cockpit. The canopy sealed. The world shrank to headset and glass. Her hands found rails she hadn't touched in years. Muscle memory betrayed her silence. Outside, maintainers scattered from the blast cone. Inside, the tones shifted. Engine steady, flight controls fighting. Tower called again, voice clipped, demanding. Viper 2-1, say intentions or state emergency. Cole's breath flooded the intercom. Staggered, unsteady. A boy's rhythm in a machine that had no patience for hesitation. Claire pulled her harness tight, last notch. She didn't check anything unnecessary, just oxygen, comms. The single page that mattered already burned into her mind. On the ramp, Drew McCall froze at the sight of her helmeted silhouette. He mouthed a word he had never dared to say out loud. Why? At the gate, the OSI agent cleared the second checkpoint. Mark Leland, soft black case in hand, stride relentless, eyes like cameras that never stopped recording. He didn't look left or right. He didn't need to. He already knew the target. Cole's helmet twitched. He wanted help but didn't know it was sitting right behind him. Sweat slipped under his chin strap. Gloves squeaked on the stick. Warning tones shrieked. Claire hadn't spoken yet. Her lips barely parted as her eyes moved across gauges with a precision too exact, too deliberate, to belong to a mechanic. The same way a medic feels pulse through gauze, She felt the jet through a thin layer of foam and steel. Colonel Denton stood at the runway's edge, still as a carved statue. Her phone vibrated Washington area code. She didn't answer, not now, not yet. Wind whipped across the desert. A train horn moaned in the distance. The OSI badge cleared a third checkpoint. Leland never broke stride. Inside the cockpit, Claire rested her hand near the comm switch. Still silent, still waiting. She would speak, but only when the moment demanded. Cole gasped. Sweat blurred his visor's edge. The jet drifted left of centerline. Tower's voice cut sharp. 2-1, you're drifting. Correct or declare emergency. The checklist corner pressed into Claire's pocket as she leaned, exhaling once. Words handwritten years ago burned into the back of her mind. Fly the data. Her jaw flexed. Her eyes never wavered. Why had she returned? Why, after 9 years of silence, was she back in a cockpit that could expose her to every danger she had worked so hard to escape? The truth was heavier than the desert heat, but it wasn't time to speak it. Not yet. What she chose in the next 13 minutes would decide more than a landing. It would decide whether her shadowed past remained buried or lit up like afterburners across the sky. And the first decision began with silence. A silence that carried the weight of everything she had lost, everything she still carried, and everything she refused to let die. The desert shimmered, warning tones screamed, and Clare Hargrove, the woman who no longer existed on paper, sat calm in the back seat, invisible no more. Because sometimes survival isn't about hiding. Sometimes it's about waiting, waiting for the exact moment when silence becomes action. That moment had come. How long can a cockpit hold silence before it breaks? Cole's breath rattled inside his mic, each gasp louder than the engine. His gloves squeaked on the stick, too tight, too frantic. The jet skidded against invisible crosswinds, wings twitching like a hunted animal. Warning tones wailed. Lights stabbed red across the console. Tower's voice cut through the noise. Viper 2-1, you are drifting left of centerline. State intentions. No reply, just Cole's stammering breath. In the rear seat, Claire tightened her harness until it bit into her shoulders. Her hand hovered over the comm switch. She waited. Not yet. Not until the moment required her voice. The checklist corner dug into her pocket. 3 words written in a younger hand pressed against her ribs like a blade. Fly the data. The nose of the jet jolted. Left wing dipped low, caught itself, dipped again. Concrete lights blurred inches below the wingtip. Cole jerked the stick, overcorrecting, breath breaking. The jet bucked. Claire inhaled, slow, exact. Colonel Denton's boots ground against the runway edge. Her eyes locked on the F-16, wobbling, threatening to carve itself into the desert floor. Her jaw clenched, but her voice stayed calm when she keyed the line. Rear cockpit, confirmed, strapped and hot. Affirm. Her voice slid into the comms flat as steel. No history, no tremor, only the present. Cole's head snapped. For the first time, he realized he wasn't alone. A pause hung thin like a thread stretched over the desert. Then Denton's voice again, you have 13 minutes, maybe less. The cockpit rattled with alarms. Cole's voice cracked. I can't. Claire pressed the switch. Calm, iron, right hand light. Watch the AOA tape, forget the horizon. Her words struck like commands from a ghost. Cole blinked, his breath staggered, but he obeyed. Eyes down, tape steady. A shrill beep cut through. FLCS degrade flashed amber. Controls twitched under his grip. The jet bucked again. Claire's boot pressed into the yaw pedal, trimming the gust. Her voice cut sharp. Switch to SEC mode. Now. Cole's hand fumbled. Wrong panel. Green switch, she snapped. Do it. A rough clunk answered. The jet shivered, then steadied. Less filtered, raw control. Dangerous but honest. Her voice stayed flat. SEC mode. Manual trim only. Your right hand must be clean. Cole's breathing rasped, visor fogging. The nose sagged. Altitude sank too fast. Desert floor climbed closer. Claire read the instruments in half a glance. Leave the gear extended. We're not cycling it again. Short pattern only. Her tone was clipped, cold, a scalpel cutting panic away. Cole tried to speak, but words broke in his throat. Warning tones screamed louder, demanding attention. Claire didn't raise her voice. She counted, breathe with me. 1, 2, 3, release, hold. Her cadence pulled him out of chaos. His breath, shaky at first, began to match hers. Warning tones softened. Instruments steadied. The jet leveled. For the first time, control seemed possible. On the ground, mechanics huddled around consoles. Someone whispered, "Who's in the back seat?" Avionics tech, another muttered. A nervous laugh almost broke, then died when the radio squealed. No one laughed again. At the gate, OSI agent Mark Leland passed a third checkpoint. His phone buzzed. He answered without slowing, eyes fixed on the flight line. One eyebrow lifted, but his voice stayed stone. Enough. Time to shut mouths. In the cockpit, Claire checked fuel. Margin thin. Her voice cut through comms. Straight in, runway 34 left. ATC came back fast. Wind 190 at 17. Crosswind. Claire muttered low, "Power on landing." She keyed the mic. Landing gear down, engines live. 180 knots approach. No plea, no drama, just instructions. In the tower, controllers exchanged quick looks. Nobody questioned a voice that flat, that certain. Clearance granted. Cole's knuckles blanched white on the stick. Claire's calm overlaid his panic like a shield. Keep 180. Don't chase altitude. The speed will hold you stable. Her thoughts raced faster than her voice. Better to smash the jet onto the runway than float and drift. Stability mattered more than elegance. Final approach. The desert air punched sideways, angry and hot. The jet skidded in its own slipstream. Cole's voice cracked, "We're off center." "Ignore it, fly the tape, fly the number, ignore the paint." Her voice cut like a blade. No softness, no comfort, just precision. Runway filled the glass. Throttle trembled under his hand. Impact. Hard, direct, tires shrieked, rubber scarred black across concrete. The jet bounced once, slammed down again. Left wingtip scraped a runway light, sparks spat. Frame groaned. But the jet held, no fire, no roll. Claire yanked the aero brake lever herself. Exact angle, exact time. The chute snapped open, clawing air. The fighter slowed, straight, true. Emergency trucks trailed behind, lights flashing. Inside the cockpit, Cole gasped, chest heaving. He hadn't realized he was still alive until the silence hit. Claire exhaled once, sharp, controlled, then nothing more. The jet slowed to a crawl, nose lowering, engines rumbling down to a low growl. Canopy cracked, desert air rushing in hot and raw. Colonel Denton's voice pressed into their headsets, steady as steel. No applause, just one question. "Where did you learn that sequence?" Her tone carried more accusation than curiosity. Claire's eyes flicked to her pocket. The scorched checklist corner pressed into her palm. Her reply was almost swallowed by the cockpit itself. Quiet, flat. "I used to fly something with trickier nerves than this." On the ground, silence held, the kind of silence heavier than noise. In the OSI trailer, Leland closed his phone with a soft click. To no one in particular, he said, "Enough. Time to shut mouths." And just like that, the jet that should have died rolled to a stop on a desert runway. Cole sat frozen, sweat dripping into his collar. He had no idea what he had just witnessed. He thought he had been saved. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that saving him had just destroyed her. Because invisibility doesn't survive miracles, and the world had already started asking, who was in the backseat? Why did silence feel louder than applause? The jet had landed, the danger was over, but the quiet afterward pressed heavier than the alarms ever had. Mechanics stood frozen on the ramp, radios still crackling, eyes wide. No one cheered. No one clapped. Instead, they whispered. Who was in the backseat? In the avionics shop, Drew McCall leaned close to the duty roster, chalk smudging under his palm. He tried to smear her name away, but the mark of it lingered. Screenshots were already out. Somebody had pulled still frames from ATC recordings, grainy but clear enough. A second helmet in the cockpit. A civilian mechanic where no mechanic belonged. Phones buzzed across the base. Conversations cut short when she walked into the room. Pilots quickened their pace in hallways, pretending not to notice her. The way people move when scandal hovers in the air. Inside a secure trailer, blinds drawn tight, OSI agent Mark Leland slid a thin folder across the table. His voice was as flat as the desert horizon. Colonel Denton opened it. A single photograph lay inside, Clare but under a different name. The lines of text below were cold, factual. Edwards AFB, developmental test flights, non-attributable deployments, 2 teammates KIA. Protective identity issued after an intelligence breach. Denton's jaw set hard. This never leaves this room. Leland's voice carried no emotion, no press statements, no acknowledgement. She remains invisible. The words hung like a locked door. But outside, the internet didn't care about locked doors. By morning, a cropped photo from a hobby blog spread across forums. Zoomed reflection in a canopy. Faint, but clear enough. A woman's face where no woman was supposed to be. The invisible woman had a name again, even if it wasn't spoken out loud. 2 days later, a visitor arrived at Kirtland AFB. No fanfare, no escort. He didn't need one. Major General Roland Greer, silver hair, eyes sharp as glass. He entered the conference room without preamble, doors sealed, screens flickering alive. He spoke her name without hesitation. Clare Hargrove. You stood in places the record insists never existed. I confirm it here. Colonel Denton stiffened. Sir, OSI protocol, this is restricted. Greer turned on her, gaze cutting. I'll take responsibility. The words landed like iron. Silence followed, heavy, undeniable. Back in avionics, Clare sat alone at her bench, soldering a circuit board like nothing had changed. But the air had shifted. Conversation stopped when she entered. Laughter dimmed when she passed. Cole found her that night, face pale, eyes tired. He didn't look at the cameras overhead. He spoke low, like confession. You saved me. Who taught you to hit SEC that way? It's not in the syllabus. Clare didn't answer, not in words. She pressed something into his palm instead, a worn sticker peeling at the edges. Black letters faded with time, fly the data. Cole stared at it like it was scripture. McCall saw the exchange from a corner. For a flicker, he caught sight of the scorched checklist edge in her pocket. Then it vanished, tucked away again. Leland watched from farther back, always watching, always counting. He carried no folder this time, only choice. 2 paths, he told her. 1, reinstate you under your real name, full security detail, transfer to another base. Or 2, you stay in shadow, cover intact. We authorize you to run closed-door instruction, no official record. Claire's eyes stayed unreadable. She asked only one question. Do I choose who sits in those seats? Yes. 3 syllables, deal sealed. In the simulator room, dust on metal desks, 6 young pilots sat stiff in their chairs. Among them, Cole. Clare set the scorched checklist flat on the table. Her voice was low, even. Everyone knows the SOP. But when the FLCS bites, what do you do? No one spoke. Cole leaned forward first, voice cautious. Fly the data, nothing else. Clare gave a single nod. It was the only praise she offered. Outside, the desert wind slapped chain-link fences. Colonel Denton stood alone by the bleachers, staring at runway lights that cut shadows sharp across the concrete. Her words carried no echo. Keeping her alive, that's enough. But even she knew. Shadows don't stay shadows when rumors catch fire. In a back corridor, Claire pressed a phone to her ear, waited for a ring that would never be answered. No one picked up. As always, she hung up without sighing, ritual more than hope. In her quarters, she pulled the checklist from her pocket, slid it into a steel desk drawer. Her fingers lingered too long on the edge. She closed the drawer but left it unlocked. The scorched corner stuck out, half hidden, glowing faintly under the dim light. Fly the data. Outside, rumors had become recognition. Recognition had become risk. And Clare Hargrove, the woman erased from every record, now stood at the edge of visibility once more. A place more dangerous than combat. Because sometimes survival isn't about living in the shadows. Sometimes it's about what happens when the shadows disappear. What makes a soldier choose silence over survival? Claire lay awake in her quarters long after the base quieted. Outside, the desert wind rattled siding and whistled through chain-link fences. Inside, the scorched checklist sat half-hidden in her desk drawer, edges curled like old wounds. Her eyes stayed on it, unblinking. Memory pressed against her like weight. She had built her life on erasure, yet the past bled through in the quiet. 9 years earlier, the heat had been the same. The sound of engines the same, but the names, those were different. Edwards Air Force Base. Test flights no one admitted existed. Call signs never spoken outside sealed rooms. She had been a test pilot then, strapped into machines still learning how to trust themselves. The F-35 had been new, nervous, unpredictable, and so was she. Her squadron was small, too small. Every face mattered. They lived on humor, coffee, and the thin belief that the impossible could be tamed with steady hands. But belief cracked fast when intelligence leaks turned their names into targets. It started with a letter, then a shadow outside a house, then a teammate dead in a parking lot, another in a stairwell 6 weeks later. OSI moved quick. Erase, rename, relocate, protection through disappearance. She didn't argue. Not because she agreed, but because grief had already carved her hollow. Her name was no longer hers. Clare Hargrove was buried in a file, sealed in ink, a ghost created for survival. But the silence, it ate at her. The last mission haunted every breath. She hadn't told anyone, not Denton, not McCall, not Cole. No one knew the truth. That day the desert sky had been glass blue. Her F-35 shook under her hands, system fault lights spitting lies. She'd whispered to herself, the same 3 words burned into her checklist. Fly the data. Not the noise, not the panic, the data. Her wingman never got the chance. His jet fell silent, rolled inverted, and vanished into the desert floor. The fireball swallowed his call sign before she could say his name. She carried the echo still. Survivor's guilt welded into her bones. OSI had told her, disappear or you're next. But what they never said, what she understood in silence, was that the real death wasn't on paper. It was the erasure of who she had been. Her phone buzzed on the metal table, pulling her back. Private line. No caller ID. She didn't answer, she never did. She pressed her palm over the drawer instead, over the checklist edge. Memory bled again. The briefing room 9 years ago. A colonel's voice flat as stone. 2 teammates KIA, 1 survivor. Mission classified, no debrief. You will not speak of this again. She had nodded once, but silence didn't mean forgetting. Now in New Mexico, silence cracked like glass under heat. The OSI agent had given her a choice, shadow or reinstatement. She chose shadow. But shadows don't protect you once the world starts watching. The next morning she stood in the simulator room. 6 trainees stiff in their seats. Cole among them, eyes sharp, searching her face for something more than instruction. Her voice stayed calm. Crosswind 19 knots. SEC mode active. Forget the horizon, trust the tape. The students flinched when the warning beep shrieked. She didn't move. She breathed steady, eyes locked on numbers. Slowly they followed. Slowly, panic softened into rhythm. When the session ended, no applause came. No questions, just silence, heavy, respectful. Cole lingered after the others filed out. He held up the sticker she had given him, voice quiet. "You really flew, didn't you? Not just sims, not just training." Claire looked at him. Her silence stretched too long. His eyes filled the answer anyway. He left without another word. In the hangar, McCall leaned against a tool chest, arms crossed. He had been around too long not to see it. He muttered under his breath, half to himself. She wasn't supposed to be here. Rumors swirled faster than engines spooling up. Blogs, forums, cropped images, anonymous posts. The woman in the backseat had a face now. Speculation sharpened into certainty. And certainty is a dangerous thing. Colonel Denton summoned her to an office with blinds drawn tight. Papers scattered across the desk, red stamps bleeding across every page. "Where did you learn that sequence?" Denton's voice carried steel. Claire met her gaze steady. The words tasted like ash. "I used to fly something with trickier nerves." That wasn't enough for Denton. Her eyes narrowed. "You disappeared for 9 years. You think you can walk back into a cockpit and no one notices?" Claire stayed silent, not defiant, not apologetic, just silent. Because how do you explain erasure? How do you explain that survival sometimes means becoming no one at all? Denton slammed a folder shut. "Keep your head down, that's an order." But orders can't stop what had already begun. That night, Claire sat alone at the bleachers near runway 22. Engines roared, then faded into the distance. Lights blinked across the airfield. She stared at the dark horizon. A question gnawed at her. Had silence really kept her safe, or had it only kept her haunted? Her phone buzzed again. Same number, same ritual. She didn't answer. She pressed end and slipped it back into her pocket. The night air carried no mercy. Only grit, wind, and the echo of ghosts. Sometimes silence is the only armor, but armor grows heavy. And Claire Hargrove was running out of time before hers cracked completely. What happens when silence no longer protects you? On base, Claire felt the change before she heard it. Hallways grew quieter when she passed. Conversations clipped short, laughter swallowed. Mechanics glanced up, then away. Pilots walked faster, eyes sharp with questions they didn't dare ask. She had lived invisible for nearly a decade, but invisibility doesn't survive miracles. And what she did in the back seat of that F-16 was no miracle. It was skill, reflex, survival burned into her bones. But to the base, to the internet, it was myth made flesh. OSI tightened its grip. Mark Lelland's face appeared at every corner, never hurried, never relaxed, always watching. He didn't threaten, didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His presence was a warning in itself. Colonel Denton kept her tone flat, her orders precise, but her eyes betrayed the weight. Claire could feel it each time they crossed paths. Denton wasn't sure whether to protect her or bury her. At night, Claire sat on the edge of her bunk, boots still on, staring at the scorched checklist on her desk. Fly the data. 3 words that had once saved her, now burning a hole in her cover. Cole knocked softly on the door one evening. He stood in the corridor, shadows under his eyes. He didn't look like the eager pilot who had frozen in the cockpit days before. He looked older, quieter, carrying something he didn't know how to set down. "You saved me," he said simply. His voice was raw, not a statement of gratitude but of truth. Claire didn't answer. He stepped closer. "I can't stop hearing your voice in my head. The way you said it, fly the tape, forget the paint. I keep replaying it. It doesn't sound like something from a checklist. It sounds lived." Her eyes narrowed. His tone wasn't accusation. It was hunger. He wanted more. She shook her head, cutting him off before he could continue. "Training is one thing, flying another. Don't confuse them." But Cole didn't leave. His voice softened, almost pleading. "Then teach me." The words hit her harder than alarms ever could. She turned away, staring at the drawer where the checklist edge stuck out. She couldn't give him what he wanted. To teach him would mean stepping into light, and the light was where her ghosts lived. Cole waited, silent. He seemed to understand she wouldn't answer. He left without another word. But the question lingered in the air long after his footsteps faded. In the hangar, Drew McCall leaned against a ladder, arms crossed, watching her work. His voice was low, almost regretful. "You can't hide forever, Claire. This place eats ghosts." She didn't respond. She soldered a circuit, eyes locked on the board. McCall sighed, shaking his head. "Maybe that's what scares them more than anything, that you know how to stay quiet." The next day, Claire stood in the simulator again. 6 trainees, Cole among them, eyes steady now. She gave them the setup without flourish. Crosswind 19, surface temp 38, SEC mode active. Her pause was deliberate. Don't look at the horizon. Don't trust the noise, look at the numbers. The warning beep shrieked. Trainees flinched. Claire didn't. Her breath stayed calm. The room steadied with her. Cole's eyes never left the screen. His hands moved slower this time, more certain. The jet in simulation steadied. The tone softened. Silence replaced chaos. When the exercise ended, the trainees exhaled as if surfacing from underwater. No one spoke. No one dared. Claire walked out first, boots echoing in the narrow corridor. Outside, Colonel Denton waited. She fell into step beside her, voice low. "You can't keep doing this in the shadows. They'll find out. They already have." Claire didn't look at her. "They don't need to know more than the numbers." Denton stopped walking. Her words cut sharper. "And what about you? How long do you think you can keep carrying this alone?" Claire's jaw tightened. She turned away, saying nothing. That night the phone rang again. Same number, same ritual. She let it buzz until it stopped. She never answered. But this time she didn't put it back in her pocket. She held it in her hand, staring at the blank screen, feeling the weight of everything unspoken. McCall found her later, sitting alone on the bleachers near runway 22. Engines roared in the distance. Shadows stretched long across the concrete. He sat down beside her without invitation. For a long time they said nothing. Finally, he spoke. "I saw your face when Cole handed back that sticker. That wasn't the face of someone hiding. That was the face of someone remembering." She kept her eyes forward. "And what if remembering is the last thing I want?" McCall leaned back, hands folded behind his head. "Then maybe teaching, the only way you'll survive it." His words hung in the air, heavy, uncomfortable, but not wrong. Claire stood without replying. Her boots scraped against the concrete, steady, deliberate. Back in her quarters, she pulled open the desk drawer. She held the checklist in her hand, thumb pressing the scorched corner. Survival had been about silence, about hiding, but survival wasn't the same as living. And as much as she wanted to stay buried, the world was already digging her up. Sometimes silence keeps you safe, but sometimes it chains you to ghosts. And Claire Hargrove was beginning to wonder which one she had chosen. How do you teach others to fight the ghosts you still carry? The simulator room smelled of warm circuitry, faintly metallic. 6 trainees sat stiff in their chairs, the glow of screens painting their faces pale green. Claire stood at the back, arms folded, the scorched checklist pressed flat against the table. She hadn't agreed to this with words. She had agreed with silence, and silence was binding. Cole sat among the 6, posture straighter than before, eyes locked ahead. Not on her, never directly, but his focus carried weight. Claire's voice cut low across the room. "Crosswind 19, surface temp 38, SEC mode active." The beep shrieked through the speakers, harsh, sudden, the kind of sound that claws at nerves. The trainees flinched, hands jerking on controls. Claire didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the numbers. Her breathing matched the pulse of the machine, slow, steady. The room steadied with her. Hands found rhythm, controls settled. The beep softened, then faded. She let silence hang for 3 beats before speaking again. "Don't look at the horizon. Don't trust the noise. Look at the numbers. The trainees absorbed it like scripture. When the session ended, no one clapped. No one spoke. They filed out, shoulders stiff, heads low. Cole lingered behind, but not long enough to press her. He understood. The lesson wasn't in her words. It was in the quiet. Later, McCall pinned a new roster on the corkboard in avionics. He scratched out her name, covering it completely. But at the bottom, in pencil, he wrote 3 faint words: Shadow Syllabus 600. It wasn't official, it wasn't recognized, but it was real. And real carried risk. Colonel Denton watched from the bleachers one evening as the runway lights blinked alive. Pilots launched into the night sky, engines roaring. Her voice low, almost to herself. Keeping her alive, that's enough. But Denton knew the truth. Alive wasn't the same as safe. And shadows had a way of becoming light, whether you wanted them to or not. Inside her quarters, Claire sat at the desk, the checklist still in her hand. Her thumb rubbed the scorched corner until the plastic grew warm. She thought of her wingman, lost to a fireball 9 years ago. She thought of the silence afterward, the way OSI had erased her. She thought of the 6 faces in that simulator, hungry, scared, needing something more than checklists. She whispered into the empty room, "Fly the data." Her own voice startled her. She hadn't spoken the words aloud in years. The next morning, the trainees were waiting before she arrived. No one sat slouched. No one cracked jokes. Their silence was sharper than any salute. She set the checklist flat on the table. Its edges curled, lamination bubbled from heat years old. Her voice steady. "The SOP will keep you alive most days, but when it doesn't, this will." She tapped the card once, 3 words. Cole repeated them under his breath, cautious. "Fly the data." Claire nodded once. That was enough. Rumors swelled around the base. A hidden class. A secret instructor. Pilots whispered about the shadow syllabus, about lessons never written, passed mouth to mouth like contraband. OSI tightened its eyes. Mark Leland showed up more often, always without expression, always without comment. He never interrupted, never acknowledged, just watched. One evening he caught her in the corridor. His words were soft, deliberate. "You're building something, small, dangerous." Claire met his gaze without flinching. "I'm building survivors." For a flicker, something moved in his eyes. Not approval, not disapproval, just recognition. Then he stepped aside. The desert night carried grit across the tarmac. Engines spooled, growling against the wind. In the simulator, the beep shrieked again. Trainees stiffened, then steadied, their hands finding rhythm faster this time. Claire stood behind them, silent, watching, measuring. Each steady breath, each corrected movement was more than training. It was redemption, not for them, for her. Because every time they steadied under pressure, she felt the fireball of 9 years ago ease its grip. Just a fraction, just enough. McCall leaned in the doorway, arms folded. His voice low. "You're not invisible anymore." She didn't look at him. "Maybe I never was." When the session ended, she walked out into the night air. Stars cut sharp above the desert. Wind rattled fences. She pressed the checklist against her chest, eyes closed. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And for the first time in 9 years, Claire Hargrove felt the faint outline of something she hadn't known she still carried. Hope. How long can shadows survive when the light keeps rising? By the time the first headline hit, the base already knew. Blogs had carried it first, grainy screenshots from cockpit footage. Then forums. Then military rumor mills too fast for any official denial to kill. The invisible woman in the backseat. No names, no confirmation, but faces didn't lie, and her reflection had already been frozen, cropped, shared 1,000 times. OSI's office trailer glowed late into the night. Mark Leland's voice stayed flat as always, a knife without edge. "Contain the noise, erase the chatter. She doesn't exist." But erasure works only once, and Claire Hargrove had already been erased. Colonel Denton stormed into the command trailer, jaw tight, boots striking the floor like hammers. Her words cut the air. "We can't keep burying this. Every second we don't answer makes it louder." Greer's voice came across the secure line, iron steady. "I'll take responsibility. End of discussion." Denton wanted to slam her fists against the table, but she didn't. She only breathed through her teeth. Orders were orders, but protection didn't always look like silence. Outside, pilots quickened their pace when Claire walked by. Some avoided her eyes. Others held them too long, as if weighing rumor against reality. She felt each glance like a blade pressed flat against her skin. In the simulator room, the 6 trainees sat straighter, sharper, Cole in particular. He no longer flinched at warning tones. He no longer looked like the boy who had frozen in the cockpit. He looked like a pilot who believed in something beyond procedure. Claire spoke less and less in training. She didn't need to say much. The checklist on the table spoke for her. But outside the simulator, silence turned to danger. Leland cornered her in a corridor one evening. His tone never rose, but the weight in it was heavier than shouting. "The internet already knows. The brass already knows. You've got 2 choices left." She waited. 1, step into the light, own it, name it, and never breathe free air again. 2, step back into shadow, keep your head down, but shadows don't last forever. Her pulse stayed steady, but her hand pressed against the checklist in her pocket. She asked only one question, and the 3rd choice. Leland blinked as if the word offended him. "There isn't one." But she knew there was. It just didn't belong to him. That night Denton found her sitting alone in the hangar, lights dim, the smell of oil and steel heavy in the air. Denton's voice was softer than usual, but no less sharp. "You saved a life in that cockpit, maybe more, but now it's bigger than you." Claire didn't look up. "I didn't save him for them." Denton stepped closer, boots echoing on the concrete. "Then who for?" The silence between them stretched. Claire's eyes stayed fixed on the checklist edge poking from her pocket. "For him, and for the ones I couldn't." Denton exhaled, long and slow. She understood more than she let on, but understanding wasn't protection. By morning, press vans had gathered outside the gates. No official statements, just cameras angled toward fences, hopping for a glimpse of the ghost. Soldiers at the checkpoint turned them away, but cameras don't need access to create noise. Inside, Claire kept her head down. She soldered circuits in avionics, logged hours in silence, but whispers followed. Not cruel, not mocking anymore. Reverent, even fearful. She hated it more than the laughter. Cole knocked on her door again one night. His face carried exhaustion, but also something steadier. Resolve. He held the sticker she'd given him, edges frayed. His voice was low but firm. "You don't have to tell me everything, but don't stop teaching me. Don't stop teaching us." Her chest tightened. He didn't ask for her past, he asked for her present. For a long time she didn't answer. Then she gave the faintest nod. Cole exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath for days. He left without another word. McCall found her the next day at the roster board. He pointed to the faint pencil marks at the bottom, Shadow Syllabus 600, his voice rough. "That's not Shadow anymore." She stared at the words, the smudge of graphite, fragile and temporary. Shadows weren't meant to be permanent. They stretched, they shifted, they broke under light. That night she pulled open the desk drawer again. She laid the checklist flat under the dim lamp. Her thumb pressed the scorched corner until her skin hurt. She whispered into the silence, "I can't disappear again." The words weren't confession, they were decision. The desert wind clawed at the siding, relentless. Engines roared on the runway, rising into the night sky. Shadows stretched across the concrete, and for the first time in 9 years, Claire Hargrove stepped closer to the light. Not for recognition, not for redemption, but because sometimes survival isn't about staying hidden. Sometimes it's about standing where the light can see you and refusing to look away. What does it mean to live as a ghost? yet leave a mark the world can feel. The old simulator room smelled of dust and cold metal. A faded sign above the door still read Electronics Calib Lab. The overhead light flickered once, then steadied into a low hum. 6 young pilots sat at metal desks, Cole among them, shoulders squared, eyes steady. Claire set the scorched checklist flat on the table. Its edges curled, lamination bubbled from heat long past. Her voice was low, measured. Everyone knows the sop, but when the system bites, what do you do? The room went silent, no hands raised, no one dared. Cole leaned forward, cautious but sure. Fly the data, nothing else. Claire nodded once. It was the only praise she gave. The lesson began without a chalkboard, without ceremony. Outside, the night wind battered chain-link fences, dry and constant. Inside, the hum of machines filled the silence. The beep shrieked. Students flinched, then steadied. Their breaths fell into rhythm with hers. Hands moved with more certainty. The chaos softened. The simulator steadied. And so did they. No one clapped when it ended. No one thanked her. They gathered their notes and filed out in silence, each carrying something heavier than instructions. McCall leaned against the doorway, arms folded. His voice quiet. You're shaping them, whether you like it or not. Claire's eyes stayed on the checklist. Maybe shaping them is the only way I can pay what I owe. McCall didn't answer. He didn't need to. In the bleachers near runway 22, Colonel Denton stood alone, her silhouette sharp under floodlights. Engines roared overhead, fighters cutting into the dark sky. Her voice carried no echo. Keeping her alive, that's enough. She didn't know Claire could hear her. That night, Claire sat in her quarters, phone pressed to her ear. The call rang into emptiness as it always did. No one answered. She ended it without sighing. It wasn't hope anymore. It was ritual, a ritual of goodbye. She slid the checklist back into the desk drawer, fingers resting on it a beat too long. She left the drawer unlocked, the corner of the card poking into dim light. Fly the data. Morning came sharp and pale. A line of F-16s idled on the ramp, exhaust curling into cool air. Mist rose from the ground like smoke. Viper 2-1 cleared for takeoff. The tower's voice cut across static, calm, and absolute. Engines spooled louder, the flight rolling forward. In the simulator, the 6 trainees stared at green screens. Claire stood behind them, arms folded, eyes steady. Crosswind 19 knots, SEC mode active. She paused deliberately. Don't look at the horizon. Don't trust the noise, look at the numbers. The warning beep screamed through the speakers. The students flinched, then held steady. Their breathing matched hers. The instruments steadied. The jet on the ramp lifted into a clean sky. 2 worlds aligned, one outside, one hidden. When the session ended, Claire walked to the door. The checklist stayed in the drawer. Her footsteps echoed once, then faded into the hum of the building. Outside, the desert carried its silence. Engines thundered, then dwindled into distance. She stood by the fence line, wind clawing at her coveralls, eyes on the horizon where contrails cut white scars across the blue. She didn't wave, she didn't smile. She simply watched, silent the way she always had. Because her story was never about medals or flags, never about parades or podiums. It was about breath in a cockpit, about calm in chaos, about carrying ghosts quietly and teaching others to outfly them. Claire Hargrove remained invisible in the records, erased in the eyes of the public. But in quiet rooms, in shadow syllabi, in the steadied breaths of young pilots who would never know the names of her ghosts, she lived on. Not loud, not celebrated, but present. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.